Hi, and welcome to this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. I'm Byron Tyler. Pleasure, friend, to have you stop by. I'm excited about our show today. Recently, I was at a little restaurant out in Fayette County, and I ran into a longtime friend I haven't seen in a while. He's actually been on this program, but it's been a number of years. Actually, it was before we actually moved to the studio we're located at now. It's been over 16, 17 years ago. But Clint Greene, it's good to have you on Mid-South Viewpoint.
Well, Byron, thank you for having me this morning. It's a pleasure to be with you, and that's the opportunity to talk about the ministry and about what the Lord is doing, among people, particularly among Native American people, and excited to have this opportunity.
Well, I'm excited about it. Again, you are the director of Native American Indigenous Ministry. That's a mouthful, Clint. I'm surprised I could say all of that. But
I didn't want to make it easy for people to, once you get it, you got it.
Once you get it, you got it. Well, specifically, what is the Native American Indigenous Ministry?
Well, our mission statement is working to see Native people reaching Native people with the gospel of Jesus Christ. That's our mission. Our focus is on, obviously, the Native American community, because I am a Native American. I'm a full-blooded Native American, and there's a 3% conversion rate to Christianity among our people. So I'm one of the 3%, you might say. But and it's kind of tragic, because there's been 500 years of evangelism in this country. Every country that came here, the Dutch, the English, the Spanish, and the French, they all were Christian nations, quote, Christian nations, and they brought their brand of Christianity with them. They built their churches, sent out the missionaries, and then our United States, of course, founded on godly principles, followed in those footsteps, and after 500 years, there's a 3% conversion rate. And what's tragic about that is the number of people we're talking about here. A number of years ago, Stanford University Research Center did a study, and they determined in 1492 there were approximately 112 million Native American people.
Right? Give that number again.
112 million.
112 million.
And right now there's approximately 7 million.
Oh, my.
7 million. So when you look at those numbers, neither one are staggering. But if you've had 500 years of the gospel being presented to this number of people, you would think that there would be a larger population of Christians. But there are many reasons for that. We're not going to get into all that today. There are a number of reasons for that. But the point is that, North America was a stronghold of satanic power. There's no question about that. And, Satan is in the stronghold business, and not only in nations, but also in individuals. And so the mission of my ministry is to attack those strongholds.
Yes. I tell you what, Clint, before we continue on, I want to know more about your backstory. We've shared this in the past, but it's been a while. Tell me a little bit more about your story. What member of the indigenous people group are you connected specifically? What was family life like growing up for you? And when did you first hear the gospel and respond to the message of the gospel?
Well, it's an interesting story, and I won't go into all the details of it, but basically, my parents were born and raised on what we call reserve in Canada. We don't have reservations in Canada; they're called reserves, because they're not federally owned by the Canadian government. They're treaty land, is what they are. So you won't find them on a map of Canada. But that's where they were born and raised. And my father moved to Niagara Falls, New York, when I was a young boy to work, and that's where I basically grew up. Now, I did not go to church as a young boy. I did not have a Bible. My mother was a Christian. Her dad, my grandfather, was an Anglican minister on that reserve. My dad was your basic good man. Worked every day, didn't drink, didn't smoke. Was devoted to his family, and he was a role model for me as a good man, if you will. And God often, my former pastor used to say, "Oh, God's worst enemy is the good man." So, but anyway, that's how I saw myself. I didn't have any need for religion or anything like that, because I just saw that people did their religious stuff, including my own people, and the rest of the week they're just like everybody else.
Are there those indigenous people group that do or don't practice their tradition of native religion? I mean, is that something that you were taught growing up in your home?
Yes, I was, because I had close family members who were devoted to what we call the old way, traditional Native belief. The only common ground between traditional Native belief, universal, and Christianity is a belief in the supernatural. That's it.
Okay.
There's no heaven or hell. There's no well, there's no Genesis 1:1. We all have our own creation stories, life after death beliefs. And so belief in the supernatural is the only thing that is in common. So you have two cultures that are diametrically opposed to each other.
Yeah.
And so growing up, I saw that among family members who were devoted to that and did all the ceremonies and rituals they were supposed to do. But, again, they were just like everybody else the rest of the time, so it didn't have an impact on me. But I learned the stories and I learned the beliefs and that sort of thing. And my parents didn't buy into that at all. Of course, my mother didn't, being a Christian, having a minister father, they didn't buy into any of that, all that. But it's an influence. It influences people because all Native people, you're going to find most of them have family and relatives that are devoted to the old way. And
can it cause some division among the people group itself because of that?
Very much so. When I accepted Christ as at the University of Memphis, I was at the University of Memphis, and when I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, and I went back to my traditional family members and told them that, I thought they'd be excited because they helped raise me. They knew what kind of kid I was, what kind of person I was. Instead, they looked at me and said, you've turned your back on us. We're done with you. Oh. And because I was the next generation to carry on the traditional ways, and now I'm out. It's no different than, a Muslim becomes a Christian,
right.
A Hindu becomes a Christian, a Jewish person becomes a Christian. You've walked away from a part of the society that is crucial, mm-hmm. which is religion.
Right.
And so that was my first response, I guess, what Christ meant, said if they hated me, they're going to hate you, So,
right.
So that was my first, and as a new Christian, that was kind of hard to deal with at first.
Well, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Well, what about the circumstances in your life leading up to the creation or the start of the ministry that you're involved in?
Well, what happened was when I became a Christian, and I asked God for a platform, to spread the gospel. I wanted to reach people, I wanted my own people. And so I went through a process of going and doing evangelistic work and going among different places. But then in 2008, I was contacted by a group of people in New Mexico, Western Baptist Association. They had taken over a boarding school, and had been run by a couple that were Assembly of God people, and they were Christian church is what they were. They were a Christian church, and they passed away, and so the Western Baptist Association under the New Mexico Convention took it over, mm-hmm. and they had it for 12 years, and they had 4 pastors in those 12 years. It was a revolving door, basically.
Now, were those pastors the indigenous
No,
members?
they weren't.
They were from the outside?
They were from the outside,
okay.
And circumstances happened, and they wound up leaving. And so they approached me, and because I've been working out there some, and approached and asked me if my ministry would be interested in helping them develop that property, develop that ministry as a Baptist church. And so I said, fine. So I entered into a lease agreement on that property, and here we are 6 years later, and it's up and going. It's a prosperous church, still under the association, But I saw no need to have that lease arrangement anymore, so I terminated that lease, and now I'm now ready to move on to the next phase. But what I saw there was that it was going to take indigenous people to reach indigenous people. The man that's there now is a Navajo man. He was born and raised there. His parents are Christians. They had a ranch there, and he went to Bible school in Denver and came back looking to serve. And so he interviewed for our position, and he became our pastor. And he's done a phenomenal job because, unlike the people that came from the outside, I'm not against people coming, and serving at all.
Right.
But he had a knowledge of the people and their ways and what they were facing and what they were dealing with and the living circumstances. Oftentimes, the living circumstances when people go to a mission field is a real challenge.
Yes.
And for him, it wasn't a challenge because that's what he grew up with.
And Clint, you mentioned the reserve in Canada where your family, lived. In the United States, I guess, as you mentioned, they refer to it as a reservation.
Because it's federally owned land.
Exactly. So are most of the people whom you minister, are they living on a reservation or outside a reservation?
It's a combination of both, because right now, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20% of us Native American people, 7 million, live on reservations. about 20%. The other 80% either are like me, live away from the reservation or live around the reservation. In cities, communities just outside the reservation, still have family on that reservation, and so they're still connected. And there are native churches there, as a result of that, in communities like, we'll say Albuquerque.
Right. Can you describe maybe for our listeners who maybe have never been to a reservation what life is like? And I guess it could vary in different parts, of the country or particular reservations.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with the development of the country. Now, my people, basically our reservations are in New York State. And because the country was in its infancy, it was just beginning to become a nation, they had to deal more equitably, I guess, with my people, my ancestors. The 6 tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy is what it was. And so they were allied with the British, and then they came in. And so there was a much more cooperative arrangement between the two nations, if you will. But as the country grew and began to expand to the west, it grew in strength militarily, politically, and they weren't as politically oriented to be in a bargaining position. It's more our way or no way. And so we had the Indian Wars, went on for 69 years, 1811 to 1880. In this expansion west, and as the country grew, then of course the terms of the agreements were more in favor of the United States than they were in the native people.
Right.
And so conditions in the western part of the United States, west of the Mississippi, are far different than they are east of the Mississippi because of this development process. And so when you go to reservations beyond the Mississippi, they vary, but none of them are really very welcoming, I guess, right. Places you'd really want to be, I guess.
Right.
Because unfortunately, I don't want to get political at all, but
No.
But basically what you're looking at is you're looking at socialism.
Yeah.
You're looking at government-controlled land. And as a result of that, unemployment rates are high, can range anywhere from 50% to 90%, on any given reservation. And the best jobs are government-oriented jobs, school system, medical system, political system, whatever. And the other jobs are just minimum wage type of jobs, and no industry to speak of because the land is owned by the federal government, and, big companies aren't going to spend a lot of money on land they can't control or can't own. And so it's a different environment. But in the midst of this environment, God has raised up his church, his 3%. And we as believers, we know that this world that we're living in, is just temporary.
Yes.
No matter what our conditions are, living conditions are, from the worst to the best, it's all going to pass away. And eternity is what we need to be focused on. And even though our conditions may not improve for us physically, we can have peace and joy in the midst of those circumstances.
Oh, Clint, I love that. That's so true. So what are some of the challenges as you look at getting indigenous people, reaching indigenous people, raising up pastors is part of your ministry, trying to help train them? I'm assuming that's really part. And you talked about some exciting new things, too, that are coming your way.
Well, the biggest challenge, I think one of the biggest challenges is people serving. Statistically, they say that 80% of the graduates of Bible schools and seminaries, 80% serve in urban areas. In other words, they serve in places like Memphis, Tennessee, or Jackson, Mississippi, or Nashville, or someplace like that. They serve in urban areas. Of the ones that serve outside of the urban areas, among Native people especially, 70% have no formal Bible training.
Yeah. God
has raised them up through their circumstances, through speaking to their hearts like he did my heart, who was not seeking God. He sought me, and a miraculous salvation occurred. That's their story.
Yeah.
That's their testimony.
Yeah.
And a story of deliverance. And now they're serving. They're reaching the people. But they have very little Bible training, formal Bible training. And so for a pastor to be a strong shepherd, I believe the more knowledge he has of God's Word and God's work and how to do God's work, the better equipped he's going to be to serve his people.
Yeah. Now, would typically a pastor pastoring one of these churches, would they be a bivocational pastor, having to have another job in addition to pastoring?
Yes, and that's typically the case that you find, because these congregations, because they're so small, and very few are self-supporting. We're very fortunate in that the pastor that we have there, one of the things I told that assembly of other members of the association, the other pastors, when we made this arrangement, was I said, you guys have had 4 pastors in 12 years. And the only way I believe this is going to succeed if we have a full-time Navajo pastor here. And they were somewhat reluctant to buy into that, because of the circumstances. Yeah. And I said, well, I believe that's God can advance his work much stronger, much faster, if that's the case. I'm not saying he's not working in his other churches, but I believe that we can put it on the fast track if we have that. And so they said, well, we'll see. So fortunately, my ministry and other churches have come alongside, and we've been able to make our pastor there a full-time pastor. He has a wife and 4 small children, and we're able to support him financially and go out there and do mission trips and help him that way. So because he's been a full-time pastor since the very beginning, he's not divided, between working and taking care of his family and the ministry. He can focus on the ministry and his family, and we've seen it do tremendous things. And it's incredible what he's accomplished in 6 years. The first Sunday I went, his first Sunday, there were 6 of us there. There were his mother and father, 3 people from the community, and myself. We were the congregation. Yeah. Right now he's running 40 plus people, every Sunday.
Oh, that's beautiful.
In fact, we're going to embark on a new building out there, next big project.
Oh, I love that. Oh, it's beautiful.
But see, I'm not discrediting or taking away from bivocational men and that serve. But if you're not divided with all that, you can focus more on the people.
Well, didn't that also demonstrate the body of Christ seeing the importance of the gospel and the need to reach their people? And we, of course, outside the reservation, outside Indigenous ministry, I mean, we're so involved with our own suburban neighborhoods and how we live, but knowing that the greatest message for mankind is the gospel, and what sacrifices are we willing to make? We look at the example of the church at Philippi. Paul commended them. They were a very poor church, in my understanding, and yet they gave out of what they had,
right,
for the gospel, to advance the gospel.
Right. And that's the value of having this full-time Native pastor, is that the circumstances he's living in are his normal.
Yes.
He's not put off by the circumstances at all. This is all he's ever known, basically, other than the time he spent in Denver, in seminary.
Right.
But this was his life growing up, and his family. His parents dealt with that life, and everybody he knew dealt with that life. So he's not distracted in any way by that. He can focus on the ministry, and bringing people to Christ, and mentoring and discipling them. He can do all that.
Clint, how is the seed of the gospel best planted among these people groups, and how receptive are the people to the gospel?
Well, I think the seed, of course, is the Word of God.
Yes.
I mean, it's Him, and the common story that I love people's testimonies. And when I ask people to share their testimony with me, my case and every case I've ever experienced with people it's a story of deliverance. They got desperate in their circumstances. They didn't know what to do. And they cried out. Look at the miracles that Jesus performed. Those were desperate, hopeless people. Yeah. Blind from life, issue of blood, lame, for 38 years. I mean, dead. Yeah. They were hopeless. They were in hopeless, desperate situations. Mm-hmm. And when people get to that point, I think that's when we can step in with the gospel and share our message of hope and deliverance. Yeah. Not necessarily from their circumstance, but from the bondage that they're living under, the hopelessness that they're living under.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And, because of our prideful nature as being sinful, we try to deny that and find ways we can, we just got to have a self-improvement or something that we can do ourselves. But as you and I both know, there's no amount of effort that we could do to attain God's favor or salvation for ourselves. It's strictly on what Christ did on the cross for us.
Yeah, exactly. And I believe that's why desperation is the key, because that self-pride, we always want to think that we can take care of ourselves, or it's not going to happen to me. Yeah. And once we get past that, once we've exhausted all the resources that we think we have, and that's where I got to in my life. I was a college student. Life looked good, from the world standpoint. I had everything going for me. But there was an emptiness and a turmoil within me that I was trying to satisfy with worldly things.
Yes.
And they weren't working.
Right.
They were just temporary. And once I got to the end of that, when I finally got to the end of that, now I needed something beyond that. And that's when God can step in.
What plan, Clint, or strategy does your ministry have to plant more churches?
Well, like I say, we try to come alongside existing churches and find out from them what they need. And
what would be some of the needs typically that you're finding these churches need?
They're facing issues like economic poverty. They're facing drug and alcohol abuse. They're facing suicide. They're facing
those two things are pretty high among indigenous people, right?
Over and above the national averages, because of the circumstances of their living conditions. But they have no hope of the future. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Now, that's the difference between east of the Mississippi and west of the. See, I grew up in a world that was open to prosperity. I mean, if you wanted it, there were plenty of jobs, big cities, plenty of opportunities. My dad, worked his entire life, provided for his family. When you get out in some of these rural areas, they don't have that. They don't have those places to go.
Right.
So what value is education? What value is hard work or ambition? Because there's no place to go with it. And so when we come into these churches, they're dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. So if we can help them with things like suicide prevention, and we can do seminars and training, we can do discipleship programs, to help them disciple other people in their congregation. We can do drug and alcohol abuse seminars to help them be equipped to deal with these issues biblically, suicide prevention, loss of a loved one, grief. How do you deal with grief? I just went to a funeral, yesterday of a couple that very fine Christian people, and the message was a message of hope because she had been a Christian, and she died, and now she's gone home. But not everybody has that.
Yes.
Not when this loved one is gone. It's tough enough when you know they're Christians and they're gone.
Yes.
But if they don't have that, if you don't have that, then what do you do with that?
Oh my.
And so we have to try to help these people that are shepherding these flocks to be better equipped.
How often do you travel? This is primarily in Arizona that you go?
Well, what happened was I was charged with helping develop that ministry. So I feel like we've done that, okay? That ministry's up and going now, going into the 6th year. It's moving ahead. Now I can expand and take what we learned there. I've invested about 15 years there in developing that. And so now we can take what we learned there and take it to other congregations, other Native congregations. So that's the purpose of the new website, is to get that message out that we're available to reach other congregations that need our help.
Yeah.
And I've already, I've done that to some degree already over the years. I've been to churches up in the Minnesota and Wisconsin, and in Oklahoma and Texas and other places.
So really, this ministry is not just limited to one particular geographical location. I mean, you're traveling across the United States.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I want to accomplish through this website, through this broadcast, is to plant a seed in people's hearts that they can be involved. They can get involved. They don't have to travel, overseas, spend thousands of dollars to go someplace. There's a huge mission field right here in America, when 97% of our people have not accepted Christ as Lord and Savior. That's a big mission field.
Clint, one of my first exposures to doing ministry or missions, when I was a new believer in Jesus Christ as a teenager, our church took a mission trip for 2 weeks, and we went to the Navajo Indian Reservation in Arizona. And I remember we camped out in tents there, and there was a lady that was representative of her people that was very gracious to us. and hosted us on her property. We would go out from there, and this was on the Navajo Indian Reservation, and drive the vans out into these little, remote areas, and there would be a hogan, which is the house that the Navajo they live in, and they would let their kids come out, and they would get on the bus, and we would drive back to the camp area and have Vacation Bible School. I never will forget that. That was the impression of that, meeting these precious people, having interaction with them, fellowshipping with them, seeing the beauty of the land that they lived on, but also seeing the harsh circumstances, as you mentioned, the economic and social conditions that they faced. We would see oftentimes a lot of the men, because of the heavy alcoholism, would be just passed out on the side of the road, and it really broke my heart. It really did. And so I think it's good for us believers to look around us. There are needs to go. The gospel needs to be taken to every corner of the globe and proclaimed, but we don't want to forget our Jerusalem, our Samaria, if you will, which is right here in our home base. Take the good news of Jesus Christ.
That's right. It's because when you look at any addiction of any kind or any behavior that's not godly, that's merely a symptom of a deeper problem. There's something going on there because that's led these people into this lifestyle.
Yeah.
And for drugs and alcohol among the Native people, hopelessness. When you have no hope, then what does it matter what you do?
Yeah.
And if there's something in here that's driving you to do this perverted activity, sexual immorality or drugs and alcohol or gambling or whatever it might be, devotion to, an irrational devotion to a career or, a situation, a sport or something, something you're involved in. There's a need there. And once you can, if people can see that you don't have that, you're a person just like they are, but you're different.
Yeah.
And then if you have a chance to share your testimony, I was just like you once. And I cried out to God for help.
Yes.
And He helped me.
Yeah.
And when you start to approach mission work that way, you contextualize their circumstance and come into their circumstance.
Yeah.
Not try to make them like you.
That's right.
But identify with where they are and what their real foundational need is.
And point them to Jesus, right?
Point them to Jesus, but to solve them because He knows your issue. He knows what's put you in this circumstance.
Right. Yeah.
He knows what's got you here.
Yeah.
And He wants to get you. He wants to deliver you.
Wants to deliver you.
The thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that you might have life abundantly. And they know steal, kill, and destroy. They know that. They're living it every day.
Yeah.
Now they need that life abundantly.
That abundant life. Clint Greene, God bless you, my brother. This has been so wonderful to have you stop by. Our time is slipping away on today's program. But before we say goodbye, I want to let our listeners know how they can engage this ministry that you are so wonderfully leading and have been. And you got a new website, too, and we can't get information out yet because it's not totally available. Or is it available? Or
No. What they can do is, I'm going to meet this afternoon with the man that's going to do it. So it'll get done pretty quickly. If you want more information, you can contact me. I'll give you my phone number.
Okay.
It's 901-687-8199. You can call me, send me a text, call me, and then I can put you on my newsletter. We're going to have a new newsletter coming out, and we can add you to that, or I can just give you more information, people more information about that.
Oh, I'd love it, yeah. And again, the ministry, friend, is Native American Indigenous Ministry. Clint Greene is our guest, is Greene is how he spells his name. Clint, my brother, God bless you. Thank you so much for what you're allowing Christ to do in and through you to reach the indigenous people around our country and being our guest on Bot Radio Network today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a privilege to be here.
Well, friends, that's all the time we have on this edition of Mid-South Viewpoint. It's our pleasure to have Clint Greene in the studio. Please pray for this ministry and be looking for this new website and how you can engage and find ways that you can help support the work as Clint reaches, again, the indigenous people of our country. That's all the time on this program. I'm Byron Tyler, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.